Welcome to the Hoja on Architecture podcast. Concept and Design. Chapter 6. Formation, Thematic Analysis, and Design Thinking. In the previous episode, we defined concept as a narrative framework, a structural intelligence that brings form, function, and feeling into coherence. But this definition leads inevitably to a deeper question. Where does that framework come from? Designers often speak of finding a concept as if it were hidden somewhere waiting to be uncovered. Yet the concept is not stumbled upon. It is constructed. It emerges slowly through a process of interpreting, selecting, refining, and organizing meaning. In this episode, we explore the process of concept formation, and we do so through the lens of thematic thinking, a mode of analysis that helps designers transform raw observations into conceptual structure. Concept formation always begins before the designer realizes it has already started. The earliest stage is one of immersion, stepping into the world of the project, encountering its behaviors, atmospheres, tensions, and potentials. Designers read places the way researchers read data. They observe how users move, where they hesitate, what they avoid, which spaces they claim, and how light, sound, and material subtly shape experience. This stage resembles what thematic analysis calls familiarization, but here the term serves less as a method and more as a metaphor. In design, familiarization is not about collecting facts. It is about sensing underlying patterns. It is an invitation to listen to what the project already knows about itself. Once immersed, designers begin to notice small fragments of meaning, details that feel significant even if their significance is not yet clear. These fragments might be spatial tensions, social behaviors, rhythmic repetitions, atmospheres, or gestures. In thematic thinking, this corresponds to the intuitive act of coding, identifying the small pieces from which larger ideas might eventually grow. For a designer, a code might be as subtle as the way light cuts across a threshold, or the way footsteps compress at a narrow point, or the way users pause instinctively near a particular window. These fragments are not concepts, but reminders that the world offers material for concepts. The next stage is where interpretation begins to take shape. Designers start grouping these fragments into thematic tendencies, clusters of meaning that reflect deeper concerns. A series of observations about transitions, for example, might suggest a theme of threshold. Repeated observations about sound absorption, waiting, and stillness might suggest a theme of quietness. Encounters with layered sightlines or filtered views might reveal a theme of gradual revelation. These themes do not yet form a concept, but they orient the designer. They act like conceptual vectors, directional sensitivities that point toward what the project might become. This step mirrors thematic analysis, but here, themes are not outputs. They are instruments of thinking. Themes alone do not produce a concept. They must be examined, questioned, and tested. This critical stage, thematic review, is perhaps the most architectural moment in the formation process. Some themes will prove too weak to support design intention. Others will be too broad, too vague, or too sentimental. Some will overlap and merge. Others will collapse under scrutiny. Designers must ask whether a theme can meaningfully shape spatial decisions. Can this idea organize form? Can it influence circulation? Can it guide atmosphere? Can it sustain a narrative framework over the entire project? Only the themes capable of doing so deserve to remain. The rest are let go, not because they are wrong, but because they cannot carry architectural weight. Through this refinement, the designer begins to discover not only what the project is about, but what it wants to do. A theme like quietness, for example, may evolve into a spatial principle, a logic of material softness, acoustic diffusion, or slow transitions. A theme like threshold may become a design principle concerning compression and release or layering and sequencing. A theme like ritual may shape programmatic organization and user choreography. At this point, thematic analysis dissolves into architectural reasoning. The designer is no longer thinking about themes themselves, but about what they generate: spatial tendencies, experiential attitudes, material languages, and organizational structures. Eventually, through repeated cycles of selection and refinement, a conceptual nucleus emerges. This nucleus is not a metaphor or decorative slogan, it is an organizing intention. It is the moment when themes converge into a structural principle that guides the design. The nucleus defines the project's why and begins to suggest its how. It carries within it a logic that can be translated into form, experience, and tectonic behavior. In this sense, thematic analysis does not create the concept but reveals the structure through which the concept can be articulated. It is the intellectual scaffolding that precedes the architectural one. As formation advances, the nucleus evolves into a narrative framework, the structure introduced in the previous episode. Themes become spatial rules. Spatial rules become experiential sequences. Experiential sequences become architectural propositions. The designer no longer asks, "What should I draw?" but rather, "What does the concept require?" Formation provides the internal compass that prevents aesthetic drift and conceptual contradiction. Without formation, the project becomes a series of disconnected gestures, attractive perhaps, but shallow. With formation, each decision belongs to a larger philosophical architecture. This process offers a central pedagogical insight. Concept is not the product of inspiration, but of interpretation. Students often feel pressured to come up with a concept as if it must appear fully formed at the start. Thematic formation reframes the task. Concept does not pre-exist the project, it emerges from engaging with it. Students learn to work with observations, to notice subtle patterns, to test ideas, and to refine them into coherent intention. They know that concept is grounded, not improvised, constructed, not collected, argued, not assumed. This approach aligns intuition with analysis, allowing creativity to operate within an intellectual framework rather than in opposition to it. Furthermore, thematic formation respects the designer's subjectivity. Designers interpret data through the lens of their own histories, sensibilities, and cultural positions. This is not a flaw, but a source of conceptual richness. Two designers can work with identical information and produce profoundly different concepts, and both can be valid. Thematic thinking acknowledges that the concept is a dialogue between the world and the designer. It is not purely objective nor purely subjective, it is reflexive. This reflexivity strengthens concept formation by forcing designers to recognize their role in shaping meaning. Ultimately, concept formation through thematic thinking transforms the early stages of design from a search for answers into a search for structure. It replaces the question, "What is my concept?" with, "What meanings are emerging, and how do they organize themselves architecturally?" Thematic analysis becomes a conceptual lens that allows the designer to move from raw material to refined intention, from fragments to framework, from noticing to knowing. Through this process, the designer builds not only a concept but a way of understanding design as an act of intellectual and experiential synthesis. Next time, we turn from forming concepts to teaching them, examining how narrative logic can brief, guide, and assess conceptual development in design education. This concludes The Concept in Design, Chapter 6, Formation, Thematic Analysis in Design Thinking. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.